Within the heart of Tokyo, the tranquil azure of a nearby river is marred by the spectacle of death as people clamor for a glimpse at the hundreds of lifeless bodies afloat before them. Meanwhile, Gaiman Yuta, aspiring blogger and editor of Kiri Kiri Basara, works tirelessly to grow his brand, which is built on disproving the supernatural. Sadly, despite his best efforts, his website has failed to gain traction, leaving the poor lad increasingly frustrated. His office is an eccentric yet cozy cafe run by Izumi Kuhei, who teases the young lad for his shy demeanor. As he refills his customers' drinks, he warns that Gaiman's continued dalliance with the occult will one day lead to him being cursed. However, the young lad merely scoffs at his warnings, adamantly insisting that ghosts are fictitious and defending his website as a platform dedicated to disproving such claims. As they go about their activities, Ryuka Narusawa, a lively member of his staff, bounces into the cafe, energizing her boss with her greeting. Abruptly, she jokes about his site's lack of revenue, a fact confirmed when he checks the traffic. Undeterred, Gaiman resolves to surpass even one day the largest blogs and news websites in the world. Moments later, Izumi turns on the TV to a news conference featuring Professor Kenzie Hasigami, who seeks to prove the existence of spirits through science, asserting it as the responsibility of all scientists to look into such matters. To his dismay, Tuka Takahiko, a scientific journalist, refutes his claims, declaring his research and society to the scientific community as heresy. He dismisses the concept of souls materially existing as garbage. As the show goes on, students wonder why their professor would go to such lengths to prove his point, even when it was quite obvious that the rest of the world was against him. Their derisive snickers led his son, Sarai Hashigami, to storm out in rage, seeking the quietness of the outdoors to cool his head. As the rain pours, Sarai encounters a young woman who suddenly asks if the demons have finally consumed his father, leaving him bewildered and confused as she disappears into the fog. Elsewhere, Tuka Sumikaze, a writer at monthly Mumum, a popular paranormal magazine, returns from a day in the field. Upon her arrival, her boss hands her the professor's next article, igniting her intrigue and fascination with the otherworldly. Upon receiving the report, her boss ponders the professor's social behavior, noting that he still lives with his mother. This curiosity stems from an encounter the professor had with an old woman at their house, which is particularly peculiar considering his mother passed away over a year ago. Back at the cafe, Gaiman and Ryukai think up methods to boost their views, suggesting that perhaps enlisting a celebrity within their niche to promote their content might be the way to go. Amidst their discussion, Izumi changed the channel, flipping to the image of Miyu, a local celebrity who made her name through her fortune-telling services. Meanwhile, Arya Querneno, proprietor of the Crimson Mansion, meets with a client who requests that she curse a man who had betrayed her trust. The client hands her a bundle of the man's hair before frantically listing down all his information. After handing the young girl the data, she leaves in a panic. Following the meeting, Aira pours herself a cup of tea and browses through her email, her attention drawn to a diabolic message containing the professor's name surrounded by demonic imagery. Suddenly, Kiryu Kusakabe, an ethereal being, disrupts her reverie, informing her of the horrid smell emanating from the entrance, one that had left her client absolutely disgusted. Aira steps out of her office to check on the smell, uncovering a handful of bloody hair stuffed into her mailbox. Elsewhere, Gamon and Ryukai continue to plan out their moves as they track down Miyu's location in their school. They find her seated in the AV room, her sheer elegance and beauty leaving both kids absolutely captivated. To reel in such a big fish, Gaiman understands that he must gather her personal details, a nearly impossible feat given his paltry social standing. Though the ever-resourceful Ryukai suggests that they simply barge in and speak to her, Miyu's personal fan club quickly thwarts their plans, demanding that they fall in line for a chance to meet the idol. When Miyu finally exits, the fans swarm her, pushing the poor lad to the ground. However, at that moment, the unthinkable happens. Miyu suddenly runs toward Gammon and gently clasps his hand, declaring that she has long been awaiting his arrival. Back at the cafe, Miyu reveals that her desire to meet him stemmed from a prediction that foretold their encounter would lead to significant developments in her life. However, now that they've met, she finds herself at a loss for what to do next. Intrigued, Gaiman discusses his blog and expresses interest in featuring Miyu's fortune-telling abilities, a move that is sure to increase his viewership tenfold. He offers her a position on his staff where she can collaborate with Ryukai to cover stories of the occult. Miyu eagerly accepts the offer, pledging to contribute her utmost to their shared cause. Her first mission is to uncover the secrets behind the Crimson Mansion, the black magic service run by Aira. While his companions head out to investigate the mansion, Gamon, upon Ryukai's egging, heads to Professor Hashigami's office to conduct an impromptu and uninvited interview. Venturing uninvited into the office, his eyes scan over a clutter of intriguing trinkets and writings scattered haphazardly across the professor's desk. Among them, a razor-sharp blade catches his attention, and he clumsily wields it in his hands. In the midst of his exploration, a misstep causes a nearby lamp to crash to the ground, its light revealing the unsettling tableau concealed within the darkness. As the supernatural shroud that envelops the metro grows ever thicker, Gammon finds himself face to face with the bloody and battered corpse of Professor Hashigami, his bloodshot eyes filled with spectral echoes and despair. As Gammon reels from his discovery, Miyu recalls a past live stream of hers, affectionately addressing her adoring fans as her little puppies. Unfortunately, her stream begins on the wrong foot, as a seemingly disgruntled caller attempts to expose her as a fraud. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, Miyu does her best to appease the caller, envisioning a future surrounded by computers. Sadly, her eagerness to prove him wrong leads her right into his trap. The caller laughs maniacally as he calls her a fraud, revealing that he is terminally ill and unable to handle electronics. His taunts send Miyu over the edge, forcing her to seek solace in the memories of her father's embrace. Elsewhere, Detective Shun Moritsuka of the Musashino police investigates the death of the professor, taking a moment to report his findings to his superiors as they arrive. Before the authorities arrived, a horrified Gaemon slowly descended into madness upon discovering the professor's dying message, a bloody inscription of the word code. Thankfully, before he loses all shreds of sanity, a mysterious voice emanating from an old radio gifted to him by his late father jolts him back to lucidity. The entity orders Gaemon to retrieve a golden tooth in the professor's mouth, which turns out to be more than a mere clue but a mysterious key. After retrieving the artifact, Gaemon narrowly evades arrest by escaping through the fire exit. Meanwhile, Shun continues his briefing, claiming that the case is somehow linked to a doujin manga created by Ririka Nishizono, which bears a striking resemblance to the brutality of the professor's murder. Unfortunately, his fellow detectives brush off his suspicions, walking off before he can even finish his briefing. As they depart, Shun contacts a fellow enthusiast on a secure line, informing him of an encrypted list Professor Hashigami had hidden before his passing. Back at Miyu's reading, Sarai Hashigami calls into the show to question the financial feasibility of her program. Like the previous caller, he once again paints her as a fraud, and her predictions are nothing but a farce to build upon her fame. Despite his accusations, Miyu steals her nerves and looks into the cards that depict visions of Professor Hashigami's death. Her predictions intrigue Detective Shun, who sets up a meeting with the young idol. During their encounter, Miyu directs the detective to Tuka, the one person she had spoken to about her powers. He meets with the young writer and learns about her fascination with the professor's theory regarding the possibility that one's conscious mind can travel through time to alter the present. To illustrate her point further, Tuka presents an unusual case involving a young girl. Elsewhere, the rest of the team awaits Gaemon at the cafe, eager to share their discoveries with their leader. During their visit to the Crimson Mansion, the girls learned that Aira offers 3 different packages, each varying in price and potency. To test their host's powers, they availed themselves of the most expensive offer, selecting Gammon as the target to be cursed. Continuing his investigation, Shun attempts to gather statements from several individuals of interest. During his inquiries, Sumikaze recounts the story of Ria Minase, whose brother passed away. Unable to come to terms with her brother's demise, Ria chose to keep his body in her presence for an entire year before the matter came to light through external reports. Back at the Crimson Mansion, the Spectre enlists Aira's help to unravel the means to shame him, threatening to send her to the afterlife if she doesn't comply. The next day, after Miyu and her close friend Chi bid one another goodbye, she runs into Ririka Nishizono, who grins devilishly as she walks by. Upon returning home, she receives several text images from Chi depicting a ghostly hand. Fearing for her friend's well-being, Miyu attempts to contact her but finds that she cannot be reached. After heading their separate ways, Chi ran into a young boy who was anything but innocent, his menacing grin radiating malevolence in the darkness. The next day, Miyu stares pensively at her friend's empty desk, feeling uneasy and empty. As the young fortune-teller searches desperately for her confidant, Detective Shun continues his investigation, feigning interest in approaching Ririka as she sits alone at a nearby park. The pair converse, and the detective slowly leads their conversation toward Ririka's background as a doujin artist. Though she is initially hesitant to discuss the matter, the young lad's sweet-talking eventually leads her to lower her guard. She reveals that her ideas stem from her vivid dreams, which Detective Shun interprets as premonitions. He shows her the professor's final message and reveals his true identity, introducing himself as the detective investigating a gruesome murder and a character depicted in her art. After he meets with Ririka, Detective Shun meets with Sarai to discuss his strained relationship with his father, brought on by their conflicting views on the supernatural. The detective asks the young lad about a mysterious note, which, of course, he seems to have no clue about. With his questions left unanswered, Detective Shun departs, leaving Sarai confused and unsettled. As the city reels from the murder, Arya reminisces about her life with her older brother. After the death of their parents, he became her sole guardian, shielding her from the dangers of the world. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived, as her older brother soon passed away during a kidney transplant for her sister. However, Arya, hounded by guilt of her beloved brother's demise, was unable to accept his death and went to the extremes for the two to remain together. After her surgery, she stole his corpse from the hospital and continued to act like he was alive for over a year until the authorities finally intervened. Her unfathomable story has left Tuka completely captivated. The young writer believes that Arya has continued her wicked ways within the confines of the Crimson Mansion. Though she wants more than anything to cover the story, her editor refuses, insisting that they cannot publish anything without proof of her wrongdoing. As the wave of disappointment courses through her veins, she recalls a conversation with the professor wherein he questioned her about her recent dreams. It may not have seemed like much then, but his death has left her wondering if there was more to his queries than she had thought. Later that evening, Miyu heads to Chi's place to check up on her friend. Unfortunately, before she enters, she overhears the neighbors whispering about the missing girl. Elsewhere, a troubled gamin wanders aimlessly through the streets, his mind clouded with fear, knowing that the police will inevitably pin the professor's murder on him. However, he recognizes that his only path to salvation is finding the corresponding lock for the mysterious key he recently discovered, a key that may hold the answers to unraveling the truth behind the murder. Unfortunately, upon arriving at the professor's household, he finds a throng of reporters by the front door, forcing him to retreat into a dark alley. Moments later, the eerie silence is broken by the rhythmic chiming of his cell phone. The second he picks up the call, a massive shadow emerges from behind. Gaiman pivots and finds himself face to face with a demonic creature straight out of the depths of hell. Before he can scream, the being engulfs him with its evil, causing him to awaken from the terrible nightmare. As he reels from the vision, the mysterious voice in his bag cackles in delight. After Gaiman rises, the entity orders the young lad to immediately turn on his TV. Upon tuning in, Gaiman is greeted by a whirlwind of chaos as news channels and civilians alike reel from the grim discovery of over 50 lifeless bodies floating like lilies upon the nearby Inokashira River. The news has everyone captivated, with even Tuka's typically bustling office coming to a standstill as her co-workers anxiously await the latest developments on the mass deaths. As the reports come pouring in, Sazawaki's editor orders her to track down a woman who claimed to have witnessed the tragedy unfold. At the cafe, Gaiman contemplates the unusual circumstances of the deaths, recognizing that such an event presents the perfect opportunity to boost his website traffic. However, his members couldn't care less about the case. All they were concerned about was their leader's seemingly renewed enthusiasm. Each member shares their own ideas on the reason for the tragedy, exploring everything from mass hypnosis to curses. Gaiman, however, believes the incident to be a coordinated self-destruction aimed at sowing chaos within their community. As the group goes back and forth between their ideas, Gaiman wonders if the professor's murder is somehow related to the tragedy. With the entire group present, the young lad attempts to introduce his pals to the being on his radio, but is unfortunately met with nothing but dead silence. As Gaiman tries desperately to convince his friends about the existence of a talking radio, Kiryu Kusakabe looks back at his first encounter with Arya after his foray into the afterlife. When he first met her, she was on the brink of taking her own life, wishing for nothing but to join her brother in death. Yet, as the train grew ever closer, Kiryu found himself drawn to her mysterious allure, ending with him ultimately saving her from an untimely demise. She mistakes him for the devil, welcoming his arrival with open arms. 2 years after their first encounter, the two have continued their partnership, successfully building the reputation of the Crimson Mansion. Meanwhile, Gaiman lies in bed and stares at his radio, reminiscing over his dad's final words. Suddenly, the radio speaks up, angrily rebuking the young lad for attempting to reveal its existence. Moments later, Gaiman confronts his greatest fear, delving further into the mystery surrounding the professor's murder. He meticulously searches the internet for the latest updates, eventually stumbling upon an article he had authored. As he scrolls through the comments, one remark catches his eye, noting the striking similarities between the murder and Ririka's doujin. However, unlike Detective Shun, he dismisses it as nothing more than a coincidence. Elsewhere, Miyu and Tuka meet at the park to discuss Chi's disappearance. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of the police, there has been no sign of their friend, causing Miyu to fear that she was one of the victims of the tragedy. Sadly, Tuka, who had covered the case for their magazine, reveals that half of the victims are yet to be identified. Her revelation leads Miyu to question her beliefs on death, wondering if an afterlife truly awaits them in the end. Intrigued by her response, Miyu likens her friend to Gammon, inadvertently revealing that she is in cahoots with the owner of Kiri Kiri Basara, a blog that had long drawn Tuka's interest. The young writer immediately requests a meeting with Gaiman, emphasizing that his website holds valuable information regarding one of her more interesting cases. However, before Miyu can respond, she receives a call from an unknown number. Believing the caller to be Chi, she immediately picks up, only to be greeted by a surprising development. Returning to the cafe, Gaiman continues to delve into the case, sharing the group's speculative theories with his viewers. However, this time, his writing serves a greater purpose than mere views. It aims to raise awareness about the increasing impact of the occult on their society. In addition, he believes that the tragedy was meant to draw attention away from the professor's murder, as the police will surely have their hands full as they attempt to unravel the mystery at Inokishira Park. Following a long day of writing, Gaiman continues to search for the lock that fits his golden key. While attempting to unlock a chain-linked gate, he is suddenly confronted by Sarai, who forces the young lad to flee from the premises. Unfortunately, Sarai eventually corners him and begins to interrogate Gaiman about his website. Sarai locks eyes with him, her gaze is unwavering as he reveals that she's aware of his whereabouts on the night his father was killed. Horrified by the revelation, Gaiman quickly rises, pleading for his innocence as he grabs onto the professor's son. Thankfully, Sarai blames him not for his father's death, but instead orders him to recount every grimy detail of the professor's final moments. Based on his investigation, evidence suggests that his father was locked up and tortured in the office, an act of violence he deems Gaiman incapable of. However, since the young lad never alerted the police, Sarai believes that he must have found something that prevented him from doing so. Upon the young man's egging, Gaiman reveals the professor's dying message, a word that Sarai had seen more than once in their household. Unfortunately, after his father's death, their home was ransacked by an unknown assailant who meticulously eradicated any last bits of evidence. However, Gaiman insists that they investigate, believing that the culprit could have overlooked critical details. Sarai obliges and the two head to their household. Upon arriving, the pair head to the second floor, where the professor's study is located. Sarai orders Gaiman to enter on his lonesome, as his conflicting feelings about his father prevent him from rummaging through his room. Gaiman enters the office, finding it surprisingly well organized for a recently broken-in room. He attempts to unlock several drawers with the key, only to discover that the culprit has smashed through every container in the room. Lost amidst the destruction, he turns to his trusty radio for guidance. The entity points him toward the ceiling he has been staring at for the longest time. After gazing at the dots above him, Gaiman realizes that the plugged-up ceiling holes are some sort of code left by the professor. After careful analysis, he realizes that the dots represent the different letters of the alphabet, a discovery that impresses the radio entity. Meanwhile, in the scene of the river tragedy, Ririka meets with the young boy who has seemingly abducted Chi. The pair discuss the birth of a new world as Ririka sketches images of the drowned bodies. Days later, Detective Shun tails Gammon and Ryukai as they head to the cafe, believing their blog to be the answer to all the questions surrounding the tragedy. Inside the cafe, Gammon grows impatient as he awaits Sarai's interpretation of the professor's coded message. Moments later, Detective Shun enters the establishment, ordering a drink that would make him quickly regret his life decisions. He insults Izumi's concoction, sending the bar owner storming out in anger, leaving the youngster in charge of the cafe. With only he and Gammon left in the room, the detective finally reveals his identity, flashing his police badge as he introduces himself to the terrified young lad. As Izumi and Ryukai return, Detective Shun departs, bidding the young lad a fond farewell. Across the city, at the Crimson Mansion, Arya and Kiryu look into Detective Shun's snooping. The latter reveals that they had witnessed the young man meet with a previous client of theirs. However, what made things more suspicious was that the target they wanted cursed was hanging around with them as they discussed matters at the Café Blue Moon. Judging by their observations, the pair believe that the scheming adversaries are working together to unearth the secrets they hold. Suddenly, Detective Shun enters the establishment, greeting Arya with a warm smile before explaining that he had some questions regarding the professor's death. To their surprise, the young detective suddenly gazes directly at Kiryu as if he too could see the spectre with his naked eye. Back at the cafe, Sarai finally arrives, taking a seat beside Gaiman before placing a photo on the ceiling on the table. As the members of Kiri Basara gather around him, the young lad explains that each ceiling had been encrypted using a format known as the Bordeaux code, a binary code that uses crosses and dots. To their horror, Sarai reveals that the letters spelled out the names of all 256 victims of the tragic drowning. Thankfully, amidst his encrypting, he had not come across Chi's name, meaning that the young girl could still be alive and well. However, instead of sifting through the remaining names, Sarai plans to decode a uniquely perplexing string of characters. Attached to the end of every name is a cryptic 10-character grouping that he believes to be part of some kind of set. After his explanation of the code, Sarai wonders why Gaiman had asked him about the name Ririka, surfacing on their ceiling. In response, Gaiman reveals that he believes the doujin artist to be the culprit behind the professor's murder, as her work predicted every grisly detail of the crime. Unfortunately, Sarai remains skeptical, dismissing the similarities between the two events as nothing but a coincidental fluke. Despite their trepidation, Gaiman persists, imploring the young lad to read through the book in hopes that it would sway his mind. His incessant pleading bears fruit as Sarai is suddenly taken aback by a number that appears on one of the vehicles in the drawing, for the said number is the same cryptic cipher he had been referring to earlier. Fully convinced of Ririka's part in the murder, Sazai decides to continue investigating the matter on his lonesome. Yet, before he begins looking into the artist, he first turns his attention toward Gaiman, who had been skittish and apprehensive the entire evening, proof that he had been feigning ignorance the entire time. Thankfully, Miyu saves him from Sazai's wrath when she points out that one of the drawings depicts a Kotori Bako, a mysterious puzzle box for children. Elsewhere, Ririka stands before a statue of a deity, wondering if the young boy is capable of stitching a soul together, and if so, what he would have brought to life. Suddenly, the lad emerges from behind the statue, a devilish grin slowly creeping across his face. Tuka explains that a Kotoribako is rumored to be a cursed object that leads to the death of any women and children who happen to enter its vicinity. To assemble such an artifact, one must first fill the box with the blood of a female beast and leave it undisturbed for a week. Before the blood dries, the body part of a sacrificed child must be placed within the box, with the part varying based on the child's age. The number of sacrifices determines the potency of the curse, with the strongest lasting for hundreds of years. She ends the call by revealing the existence of a Kotoribako within their neighborhood before warning the youngsters to avoid the ill-fated box. Following their discussion with Tuka, the Kiri Bakara crew searches for the box's location using Ririka's novel. After flipping through a few pages, Sarai spots an ancient shrine similar to one located at the heart of their city. However, there are 3 different shrines within the city, each with a similar design and configuration. After careful consideration, they deduce that the shrine they are referring to depicts good fortune. Unfortunately, that just so happens to make matters worse, as they discover that there are 6 shrines that match the description. As they rack their brains to pinpoint the location of the Kotoribako, Arya suddenly appears behind them, informing them that the shrine they are searching for is the one located by Meiji. Though the rest of the group welcomes her with open arms, Gaiman flies into a panic, believing that she has come to curse him. While Sarai restrains the frantic young boy, Arya reveals that she had found their earlier conversation quite interesting, a tidbit relayed to her by her demonic companion. As expected, Sarai vehemently rebuffs her claims, urging the young girl to summon the demon. Suddenly, the light bulbs around them explode into a shower of glass, quickly silencing the rude young lad. Following the supernatural occurrence, she reveals that at the said shrine lives a boy whose hair and body are as pale as moonlight. Her revelation causes Miyu to rush out in a panic as she recalls the final image Chi had sent her. Moments later, the group arrives at the shrine, where they immediately encounter the boy Arya had mentioned. Miyu shines her flashlight on the lad as he toys with the kotoribako, the stench of blood filling the air with his every movement. Stealing her nerve, Miyu approaches the lad, questioning him about Chi's whereabouts. Unfortunately, her resolve is quickly shattered when the lad suddenly turns and reveals that they had all planned to use her as a sacrifice for the demonic box. The boy suddenly storms off, prompting the others to give chase. Miyu, however, remains frozen in place, her gaze fixated on the bloody box. After several intense moments, she reaches into the artifact and spots something that horrifies her: Chi's bloodied clip atop a pile of flesh and guts. Elsewhere, a gathering focused on the creation of the New World System convenes. The speaker reveals that they had finally resolved the prison of time dilemma, thanks to a paper published by the late professor. Thanks to his research, the spirit realm will soon be within their grasp. Earlier that day, Detective Shun questioned Arya about the Kotoribako box, believing that her expertise in black magic would come in handy during his investigation. He asks her about Kodoku, a method of conjuring he believes to be responsible for the murders. Unfortunately, Arya remains uncooperative, ordering the detective to leave her premises. Sadly, the young man persists, claiming that Arya's relationship with the demon is built on her longing for acceptance, even if it is from a monster. His words send her over the edge, leading her to hurl a jar of ink at the detective. As he departs, he crosses paths with Kiryu, warning the being to watch his back. Back at the gathering, the speaker reveals that tragedy was necessary to forward their plans of eternal life. Meanwhile, Gammon continues to study the professor's code as Miyu recovers from the horrific discovery. Though his work is quite important, his talking radio reminds him of the key's significance and his determination to continue searching for the lock it fits. After a long day in the field, Detective Shun returns to his department, only to be seemingly ignored by his co-workers. Moments later, two of his fellow detectives walk into the room, tears streaming from their faces as they seemingly mourn the death of a close confidant. Simultaneously, Tuka arrives at her office and finds her boss weeping uncontrollably, while Sazai discovers his mother glued to the television set. As Gaiman works on the code, a news report reveals the newly discovered identities of some of the victims. To his horror, the reporter suddenly mentions his name at the exact moment he discovered it in the professor's ceiling. Though he finds it quite hard to believe, his companion's sudden radio silence leaves him questioning everything. As the news of their deaths shatters the hearts and souls of everyone they hold dear, Asuna Kisaki arrives at the PD to replace the deceased detective Shun. Meanwhile, an absolutely flabbergasted Gaiman struggles to come to terms with his new reality, his troubled thoughts leaving him staring blankly into the television. Unable to come to terms with his demise, the young lad heads outside, his fingers reaching out to touch objects, desperate to feel their solid presence and prove to himself that he is no mere spectre. While he struggles to prove his existence, a young woman accidentally drops her wallet as she walks by. Gammon takes the wallet and calls out to her, breathing a sigh of relief as she responds to his beckons. Moments later, Gaiman arrives at the cafe where the rest of the team awaits him. However, joining them today is a fresh new face, as Tuka politely introduces herself to the young blogger, who, in response, stands in awe of her credentials with Mumu. To his dismay, however, she did not visit for an interview, but instead to discuss the recent events at the lake. Tuka reveals that, like him, her name had also been mentioned during the broadcast, a revelation that both Sarai and Ryuka shared. Unfortunately, though Gammon brushes it off as mere coincidence, Sarai's undertaking is more than enough to provide undeniable proof of their foray into the afterlife. As they continue their discussion, Sarai mentions his father's encrypted list, a revelation that draws the young writer's intrigue. Looking back at her previous conversations with the professor, Tuka suspects that those on the list are part of a massive conspiracy based on her mentor's theory regarding the intricacies of the human soul. According to his theory, the professor believed that one's personality and life experiences could be recorded and projected, thus defying the cold hand of death. Gaiman, unconvinced by their theories, argues that such ideas are purely speculative and lack concrete evidence, leading to a heated tussle between him and Sarai. Thankfully, Ryuka quickly diffuses the situation, suggesting that the young blogger channel his ideas into a thought-provoking clickbait blog. Back at the PD, Asuna uses her extrasensory perception abilities to peer into Detective Shun's final moments. Within a dreamlike movie theater, she watches as the young lad discusses how the manga before them depicts the events of the professor's death in clear detail. Before the memory fades, Detective Shun reveals that he will leave a clue behind as a failsafe, before declaring Rurika, the author of the manga, and a local sky sensor station as his prime targets for investigation. After the deep dive, Asuna flips through the manga, its adult themes catching the young lass off guard. She then requests her fellow detectives to look into sky sensor stations, convincing them by activating her ESP to reveal memories and secrets hidden deep within. As the detectives depart, Asuna checks the station's website, only to discover that they had since ceased operations due to their host's recent passing. Elsewhere, Detective Shun converses with his mysterious contact, voicing his displeasure over Asuna taking the case in his stead. Following the call, the young detective laments his carelessness, a trait he and the eavesdropping spectre Kiryu both share. Gazing towards the spectre, the detective reveals that Kiryu's ability to astral project is a result of a mishap at a fuel cell factory, the same factory that is said to be developing a new isotope. However, before he can further question Kiryu on the matter, he vanishes without a trace. At the Crimson Mansion, Arya, another victim in the accident, finally sees Kiryu's true form. Meanwhile, back at the shrine, Tuka continues her investigation while Sarai finally faces his demons, grappling with the unresolved emotions he harbored towards his deceased father for being so difficult to understand. Back at the cafe, Gamon discovers that some occult fanatics had located the morgue containing the bodies of all the victims. Despite his sky sensors egging, the young lad continues to hesitate, unable to come to terms with his demise. At the said morgue, Asuna gazes at the cold and pale corpse of Detective Shun. After looking through his belongings, she gently rests her hand upon his head and activates her ESP, taking her back to the stage of dreams. Upon her velvet seat, she watches in horror as the detective, alongside the other victims, walks ominously into the unknown depths. She emerges from the vision drenched in an ice-cold sweat, her body quivering as she adamantly insists on checking the other bodies. As her fellow detective opens up another box, Gaiman makes his way to the morgue. Along the way, he accidentally bumps into another passerby as he fumbles with his phone. However, to his dismay, Gaiman realizes that the lad he bumped into cannot see or hear him. Unnerved by the encounter, he continues toward the morgue as a mysterious masked figure watches from a nearby alley. Meanwhile, Asuna delves into the memories of the deceased, encountering an eerily similar haunting silent stillness with each one. Based on her findings, she speculates that they were brainwashed, their consciousness taken over by an unknown entity that guided them to their watery graves. The weight of her discovery causes the young girl to collapse, but knowing the urgency and significance of her investigation, she gathers her strength and presses on, delving into the dreams of the last remaining body. However, unlike the others, she finds herself lost in emptiness. As she reels from the discovery, she suddenly finds herself before the spirit of the very corpse before her. Before coming face to face with his lifeless body, Gammon struggled with his trepidations, until his sky sensor pointed out that such a discovery would significantly boost the engagement of his blog. After weaving through a throng of reporters, the terrified young lad now stands before an equally terrified Asuna. As Gaiman struggles to make sense of the madness, Tuka and Sarai arrive to continue their investigation. They spot the young lad hunched over his corpse, prompting them to seek out their own cadavers. Despite the wave of anguish engulfing him, Sarai takes a deep breath and carefully analyzes the situation, ultimately deducing that his father had been right this entire time. While the young ones reel from their discovery, Asuna recuperates in a nearby room. After regaining her strength, she heads back out, only to find no sign of Gaiman. Instead, she finds the keychain that had long been attached to the young lad's back. Meanwhile, the trio grapple with the challenge of accepting their new reality. The next day, Ririka once again hangs out with the ghostly young boy, who claims to be an immortal being born from the essence of scandium. As Ririka and the immortal lad delve into the realm of ghosts and mysteries, Gammon heads to the sky sensor station Detective Chun had been planning to visit. To his delight, the host actually notices his presence, giving him a sly wink as he begins his program. Gammon grabs his sky sensor and eagerly tunes in, listening intently as the DJ answers the numerous questions sent to him by his listeners. Unfortunately, the sky sensor soon falls silent, revealing his encounter to be nothing but a memory of a happier time. Suddenly, he is approached by Asuna, who introduces herself as an agent of the FBI and a fellow student at Saimi High. Intrigued by her ability to see him, Gaiman invites the young detective into the sky sensor station that had once been manned by his father. There, Asuna reveals that Gaiman's dad had been tied to a syndicate known as the Eight Gods of Fortune, a group that would frequently conduct spiritual seminars. As his following grew, Gaiman's father began meeting his listeners in person, which eventually devolved into a mysterious cult. Her accusation cased Gaiman to lash out in anger, vehemently denying her claims as he defends his old man's name. His sudden outburst leads to her own furious rebuttal, sparking a heated argument between the two. Thankfully, tempers quickly die down as Asuna apologizes for speaking ill of the dead. Once they both calm down, she implores Gammon for his assistance, deeming him vital to the success of their entire endeavor. To convince the lad, she uses her ESP to recall the earlier vision, who is left floored by her outstanding abilities. In fact, he is so impressed by her skills that he agrees to cooperate on one condition. She must allow him to interview her for Kiri Kiri Basara. Asuna agrees to the deal, asking the lad if there are others like him who wander the world of the living with their memories intact. As Gaiman lists down the members of his group, he reveals that amongst them is Detective Shun. Unfortunately, before Asuna can further question the young lad, she is ordered to return to the station immediately. Before they head their separate ways, Gaiman suggests that they meet at the cafe to continue their conversation. Asuna eagerly accepts before leaving in a hurry. As she rushes out of the station, Detective Shun quietly observes from the shadows. Meanwhile, Tuka rummages through her office desk, her eyes darting toward a book given to her by the late professor. Suddenly, her boss interrupts the stillness when he enters the room. Oblivious to her presence, he inadvertently reveals his ties to the 8 gods of fortune, before hiding a flash drive within the mouth of a statue. When he departs, Tuka quickly retrieves the drive and finds data on their plans to transform the world into a spirit realm. Elsewhere, the heads of the said group discuss the completion of the New World System, the final key in the devious plan. With everything falling into place, the group discuss their business model, targeting the wealthy citizens and high-ranking officials who wish for eternal life. Those who buy in will be administered a dose of scandium, then irradiated with electromagnetic waves, thus granting them immortality. However, their promise of eternal life is a mere ploy to seize control of these influential individuals, allowing them to expand their enterprise insidiously. Suddenly, the screens shut off and the entire room goes dark. Moments later, the screens come back to life, an ominous voice, the sound of which causes the men to quickly rise and bow in respect. The voice absconds them for taking the matters of life and death so lightly, reminding them of how the obstinate wickedness of man has been the driving force behind their development. Later that evening, Tuka meets with Sarai to discuss the date she retrieved from her editor's drive. She shows Gammon the image of his father's book, leading him to deduce that it was the devious editor who ransacked their home. Seething with anger, Sarai rises, demanding that Tuka hand him the files for him to further study. At the cafe, an exhausted Gammon is greeted by Tuka, Sarai, and the ever-energetic Ryuka. After settling down, the group present their findings on the 8 gods of fortune. Suddenly, Detective Shun interrupts their conversation, praising the youngsters for all the information they had gathered. As her friends go about their business, Miyu gazes longingly at Chi's clip, reminiscing about the beginning of their partnership. Unfortunately, the memory of her bloodied remains sends her crashing back down to Earth. Seconds later, she receives a text from her deceased friend, leaving her in stunned silence. As Sarai voices his suspicions toward Detective Shun, Tuka suddenly receives a message from Miyu containing an odd photograph. Moments later, Miyu, on the verge of tears, desperately asks her friends about the image. Thankfully, Sarai knows exactly what the photo holds, revealing the object to be a bomb memorializing the victims of an airstrike in Anmeiji. With a concerned expression etched onto her face, Tuka queries Miyu's intentions. Regrettably, she receives no response, as her friend abruptly declares that someone is alive before disconnecting the call. Fearing for her safety, the group prepares to follow her to the shrine. Sadly, Gaiman, disheartened by the series of events, chooses to stay behind, prompting the others to leave without him. Meanwhile, Asuna learns that a vital piece of information was taken from the PD. The stolen item revealed to be none other than the kotoribako containing Chi's remains. As Sarai and Tuka make their way to the shrine, Miyu faces the darkness on her lonesome, eager to save her dear friend. Upon arriving at the shrine, she calls out to Chi, only to be met with the stillness of the night. Eventually, she locates the bomb in the photo, slowly reaching out for the massive piece of weaponry. Suddenly, the ground beneath her begins to shake, and the shrine slowly slides backward, revealing a hidden underground staircase. Terrified but desperate to locate Chi, Miyu faces the unknown, descending down the stairs with trepidation. She soon finds herself in a gloomy hallway with a single metal door waiting at the end. She slowly traverses the darkness, each step filled with uncertainty and apprehension as she makes her way to the end of the hall. Upon reaching the end, Miyu musters all her strength to open the rusted metal door, the hinges emitting a creaking groan as it reluctantly swings open. She enters the room and calls out for her friend, but once again receives no response. Seconds later, a blinding light suddenly fills the room, revealing the numerous bloody kotoribako boxes littered upon the floor. Before Miyu can react, the ghostly young boy greets her, tossing Chi's smashed phone toward her. Grabbing the phone, she questions the boy about Chi's whereabouts, who responds by smashing the box containing her bloodied clip and remains. He absconds Miyu for losing, thus forcing him to recruit Ririku to steal it from the PD. Then, with a manic look upon his face, he invites her to a game of cards, holding up a colourful playing card. Miyu, however, could care less about his games, for all that matters now is the safety of her friend. Unfortunately, the lad ignores her pleas and babbles on about the value of his collection and his desire to amass the rarest of boxes. Meanwhile, at the cafe, Ryuka pleads with her dear friend, only to be once again met with stern refusal. Back at the shrine, Asuna overhears the ghostly lad taunting Miyu, revealing her to be a visible ghost resulting from the use of scandium. From her vantage point, she watches as the boy reaches deep within a kotoribako box and pulls out a clump of Miyu's hair he had retrieved from her corpse. The sight of her lopped-up stands causes Miyu to yell out in horror, collapsing onto the floor as her anguished screams fill the room. The poor girl's cries finally force Asuna to intervene, emerging from the shadows and holding the lad at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Takasu, the fiend who had headed the meeting, meets with their leader, a man he refers to as the Emperor. Within the confines of his darkened hospital room, the Emperor reveals that his body has finally reached its limit, the severity of his sickness causing him to lose all semblance of humanity. However, he does not fear death, for he believes that the expiration of his physical body will be the beginning of his true existence. With that, he impresses upon Takasu that failure is not an option. Asuna orders the young lad to place his hands in the hair as she charges him for Chi's murder. However, instead of complying, the lad picks up an axe and charges toward her with murderous intent. As he rushes forward, he evades several shots, slashing at her like a wild animal. After narrowly avoiding his flurry, she lands a clean shot in the arm, sending a wave of pain coursing through his body. As Asuna reads, the enraged boy attacks, catching her off guard and causing her to drop her pistol. Just as he is about to land the coup de grace, Miyu thankfully intervenes, knocking the lad off balance with a mighty kick. Seconds later, other detectives arrive and disarm the attacker, tackling him onto the floor as he attempts to escape. With matters resolved, Asuna reaches for Chi's remains, allowing Miyu to bid a tearful farewell to her dear friend. Upon emerging from the underground staircase, Asuna notices Ryuka seemingly interacting with an imaginary figure. The next day, Asuna mulls over the series of unexplainable events stemming from the murder of the professor. Looking over the case, why someone would dare murder the man, and if his son's death is somehow related to the case. Elsewhere, Miyu thanks Tuka and Sarai for saving her from the darkness, apologizing for leaving them worried sick. To their surprise, Miyu reveals that she knows about their deaths as she had seen her name on the news report. Supporting her claims, Sarai explains that they too are deceased, along with Gaiman, Detective Shun, and Ririku. Despite the shadow of uncertainty that looms over them, the youngsters are sure that the events are intertwined in some way. Looking back at her encounter with the young boy, Miyu recalls his rant about scandium and his qualms about her purchasing the said element from the 8 gods of fortune. With that, Sarai suddenly whips out his phone and reads through his father's theory, which states that a direct injection of scandium to body, a reaction divergent to the astral form, can be achieved, allowing one to escape the prison of time entirely. While Sarai brushes it off as supernatural drivel, Tuka remains adamant that someone manipulated the professor and then took his life when they were done with him. Convinced that the professor had left a message for his son, she insists that they explore his laboratory despite Sarai's hesitations. Back at the PD, Asuna continues browsing through the files on the murder, leaving her wondering if her dear confidant, Detective Shun, is wandering around like gammon. Speaking of the detective, he meets with Kiryu, who solicits his services to look into Arya's death. Though Detective Shun is willing to work with the Spectre, he requests that he be taught how to reverse time in exchange for his services. Meanwhile, Asuna wonders why only Gaiman remains visible to the naked eye. Looking back at their encounter, she recalls that the only time she ever caught wind of Gammon was when she heard static from his sky sensor. Furthermore, during her tussle with the pale lad, she heard screams and cries from someone who was supposedly there with the child. At that moment, she realizes that Gaiman and his sky sensor holds the answers to all her questions. Moments later, her fellow detective presents his findings on the 8 Gods of Fortune, revealing that they had been involved in the shady dealings of Scandium. Suddenly, one of the detectives rushes in, declaring that they had identified a certain girl they had spotted at the shrine. As the investigation kicks into full swing, a shattered Gaemon pleads with his deceased father, imploring him to speak to him through the sky sensor. To his delight, the device suddenly whirs to life, emanating his father's final broadcast. However, before he can bask in his father's voice, Gaemon suddenly finds himself before a now stoic and somber Ryuka. Amidst a gentle downpour, the clumsy girl Gaemon had run into days before once again drops her wallet. As she picks it up, she notices a masked entity waving around a staff adorned with several streaks of snow-white fabric. Following one final wave, the young girl vanishes into thin air, the being following suit soon after. As the voice of Gaemon's father echoes through the station, an eerie, silent Ryuka slowly approaches the DJ booth, taking a seat with a word or glance toward her terrified friend. Upon Gaemon's egging, she reveals herself to be more than a mere minion, but the voice that has been guiding him through his foray into the supernatural. At the moment, however, she is neither Ryuka nor Zonko. Meanwhile, Miyu arrives at the cafe and finds it oddly empty and lifeless. Without anyone to speak to, she rummages through Gaemon's files, eventually locating the list of names he had decoded. While browsing through the roll, she spots her own name but sadly finds that Chi's name is nowhere to be seen, signifying that her dear friend is truly gone. Looking back at her time with Chi, Miyu decides to put her fortune-telling skills to good use, beginning a divination session by placing several cards upon the table before her and reciting a complex incantation. As she peers into the future, Tuka and Sarai go through the professor's office, discussing once again the intricacies of their supernatural state while they rummage through his files. Sarai eventually spots a photo of Nikola Tesla with his daughter, Oveline, a stunning revelation considering the scientist was widely believed to have remained single to focus on his science. Overflowing with intrigue, the pair read through several letters discussing the said woman and a mysterious family tree. Upon further investigation, they discover that Oveline is none other than Ryuka herself. Back at the Sky Sensor Station, Ryuka finally introduces herself as Oveline Narusawa Tesla, the daughter of the famous inventor. Amidst Gaemon's uproar, she explains that she passed away 73 years ago, and now exists as an astral body, with Ryuka's shell serving as her medium. To convince Gaemon, she screams out the instructions given to him by Zonko during the night of the professor's murder. Unfortunately, even that is not enough to convince the young lad, forcing her to discuss in detail the enigma behind their existence. The sudden turn of events is too much for Gaemon to handle, leading him to yell out in frustration as he begs Ryuka to return to her normal energetic self. His mind rife with turmoil, the young lad collapses onto a nearby table, tears pouring as he recounts the promise he made to his friend, a pledge that seems like nothing but a distant dream. Suddenly, Ryuka rises from her seat and jolts Gaemon out of his uproar. Overcome by emotion, he lets out a booming bellow that frees him from his electric prison, leaving both he and Ryuka absolutely speechless. He turns toward Ryuka and apologizes for seemingly hurting her hand, who in response assures that she is fine, and instead praises the lad for his amazing powers. Elsewhere, Takasu summons the members of the 8 Gods of Fortune to discuss a pressing matter. To their dismay, he reveals that the key needed to power a gun is capable of replenishing a spirit's electromagnetic force, thus granting them eternal life. Despite their anger, he seeks their assistance in securing the necessary manpower needed to hunt down missing Trinket, which was last known to be under the watchful eye of the grandchild of their emperor, Ryuka. As Ryuka's secret slowly unravels, Asuna decides to pay the cafe a visit, hoping to learn more about the young girl. However, while heading toward the cafe, her driver reveals that the establishment had long shut down. Meanwhile, the cleansing team goes about their business, sending spirit after spirit into the afterlife. During one of their seances, some bystanders happen to snap a photo of the paranormal essence disappearing into the wind. However, before they can send the image to Kiri Basara, the masked figure murders both men and shatters their phone, thus erasing all evidence of their misdeeds. Back at the cafe, Tuka and Sarai find Miyu in the middle of her fortune-telling session. Unfortunately, like he did in the past, Sarai brushes off her work as a mere parlor trick meant to deceive the desperate. However, Tuka intervenes, arguing that he should stop belittling Miyu for trying to help them out. As Sakai reflects upon his sudden epiphany, Kiryu pays Arya a visit at the Crimson Mansion. Suddenly, the spectre collapses, memories of Arya's childhood flooding his mind as he struggles for air. Moments later, Sarai reveals that he has finally deciphered his father's letters, thanks to Miyu's help, allowing him to decrypt the names and information of all the victims. Based on the code, he uncovers the personal medical affliction of each victim and the hospital at which they were treated. However, what truly astounds them is the fact that every facility is operated by Ryuka's grandfather. Before they can delve further into the matter, Ryuka and Gaiman arrive. Ryuka reveals her true identity to the rest of the group, leading Sarai to flash the photo they had found in the professor's study. To help them understand, Ryuka recounts her past, explaining that her father had fallen in love with the daughter of the Nurusawa Corporation's CEO during a business trip. Since she was born out of wedlock, she grew up in Japan, eventually taking over her father's research and development. Though her contributions hardly compare to her father's achievements, she managed to successfully expand on one of his studies, communicating with the spirit realm. According to Ryuka, her father had spent years attempting to contact the spirit realm, an endeavor hampered by the skepticism of Edison. His study asserted that the true nature of spirits were astral bodies, a concept that Ryuka built upon by exploring the relationship between these said bodies and sky sensor waves. During her research, she discovered that the reason humans are unable to observe spirits is because they exist on different frequencies. However, the reason that Gaiman and his friends can seemingly interact with the people around them is because they were forcibly attuned to the world of the living. Elsewhere, the heads of the 8 Gods of Fortune visit an abandoned Air Force base, which they have recommissioned as a facility to contact the spirit realm. With the fortified walls lie several massive satellites, each emitting magnetic waves to the subjects of their experiment. However, the waves will soon be sent out to those who purchase scandium, allowing them to build the world their emperor had dreamed of. Upon entering the facility, one of the scientists reveals that they had encountered a minor hiccup in their operations, flashing a photo of Garmin for the entire room to see. Staring daggers into the young lad's visage, Takasu reveals that Garmin was imbued with a stronger magnetic force, resulting in several mutations. The unique nature of his case forced Takasu to have Ryuka personally deal with the matter, thus explaining their electric relationship. Meanwhile, Asuna confronts Izumi about his role as proprietor at the cafe. Upon entering the establishment, she spots both Gaiman and Ryuka, leading her to immediately draw her pistol. She holds Izumi at gunpoint, demanding to know who the people in the room are at that moment. To their surprise, Izumi claims that only he, Asuna, and Ryuka are currently present in the room, intentionally disregarding the presence of the remaining spirits. When pressed, he even denies knowing Gaiman, leading to the young lad accidentally trip over a stool in frustration. Unfortunately, that causes Izumi to accidentally acknowledge the young lad, resulting in the unraveling of their flimsy facade. Enraged by the kerfuffle, Izumi suddenly draws a knife and hurls it at Asuna, the blade knocking the gun out of her hand. With the detective disarmed, Izumi suddenly leaps atop the counter and draws his staff, revealing himself to be a member of the cleansing team. He leaps toward Gammon, his eyes burning with fury as he prepares to eradicate the spirit. At the last second, Ryuka pushes her friend aside, bracing herself as she absorbs the blow. As she struggles to her feet, Ryuka orders the others to run, for the weapon Izumi wields holds an ancient power capable of erasing spirits. Gaiman, lost in the confusion, asks Izumi, someone he once held dear, about his true identity. Reaching into his bag, Izumi reveals himself to be the leader of the 8 Gods of Fortune as he dons his sinister mask. In addition, he gloriously confesses to the murder of Gaiman's father after he discovered the truth behind their operations. Shattered by the betrayal, Gammon collapses onto the floor as Izumi continues to taunt him. Just when it seemed like the fiend could not get any more heinous, he suddenly admits to murdering the professor, reveling in the pain and suffering the poor man endured in his final moments. Without warning, he lunges towards Sarai, who narrowly avoids his attack by rolling out of the way. Izumi then turns his attention toward Miyu and Tuka, the helpless spirits cowering in fear as he approaches. However, just as he's about to snuff out their existence, Gaiman unleashes a blood-curdling scream that mysteriously knocks the staff out of his hand. With tears streaming down his eyes, the lad loses all pretense of calm, yelling in anguish over losing everything he had held dear. Amidst his uproar, Ryuka slowly aims the magnetically attuned gun towards her friend, her voice steady as she asks him to trust her. Seconds later, she orders him to attack while simultaneously unleashing a burst of electromagnetic energy into the lad's body. The power supercharges Gamon, sending him flying towards the traitor at breakneck speeds. Unable to react, Izumi eats a thunderous blow to the face, the force of the attack shattering his mask and sending him flying across the room. Back at the Air Force Base, alarms roar through the facility as Gaiman's sync rate skyrockets through the roof, a development that Takasu assures will be dealt with immediately. However, unbeknownst to him, his best asset, Izumi, is now in the hands of the police. Following their encounter, Asuna attempts to take Ryuka to the PD for questioning, only to be stopped by Gaiman, who explains his friend's role as the medium for Overleen Tesla. Meanwhile, Arya finally confronts Kiryu, questioning his existence as a devil. In response, Kiryu recounts his memories with her in the mansion, remembering a time when he was truly happy. Unfortunately, before he can explain further, Detective Shun suddenly interrupts, having arrived on his insistence. Before revealing the data he gathered, the detective orders Kiryu to unravel the secrets behind his ability to travel to the past. To his dismay, however, the Spectre reveals that he is unable to time travel. Instead, he explains that time moves at an accelerated rate in the astral plane, allowing him to seemingly turn back the hands of time. With his questions answered, Detective Shun reveals that Kiryu and Arya's brother were both at the hospital during his accident, the former receiving the young man's corneas when his surgery failed. Along with the gift of sight came the memories of the deceased, thus finally explaining the reason behind his mysterious flashbacks. As brother and sister reunite, the detective departs, leaving the two to bask in each other's presence. At that moment, Arya realizes that the fateful encounter by the railroad tracks was the night that her brother finally made his way back to her. Returning to the cafe, Overleen reveals her plan to foil the Emperor's sinister plan by destroying the device that allows them to control spirits. To do so, she began by possessing Ryuka, as they would never suspect their leader's granddaughter as the mastermind behind their downfall. The next step in her plan is to infiltrate the military outpost using the gun powered by the key that Gaiman had retrieved from the professor's corpse, a revelation that Sarai does not take lightly. The final key to her plan is none other than Gaiman himself. She explains that the young lad possesses an ability known as an orphan receptor, which allows him to summon a larger electromagnetic force than other spirits. After turning into spirit form, he can then discharge the build-up force using the sky sensor, a device that Gaiman's father had modified over the years. The ability to discharge such a force is one that only Gaiman holds, for he holds a resonance with the sky sensor no one else can achieve. With this godlike power, Ryuka plans to annihilate Arai in a single blow. Suddenly, Asuna interrupts their conversation, carrying with her the sky sensor. Unfortunately, her arrival sends a wave of mutual recognition coursing through Gaiman, leading the key to disappear as he realizes that it would have been impossible for his spiritual form to bear the artifact. Out of options, Ryuka decides to serve as the key, willing to risk her life to bring the Emperor to his knees. As the youngsters begin their operation, the Emperor proceeds with his transition into the astral plane, deep in the heart of an underground facility. Before leaving his mortal shell, her proudly proclaims that their eternal reign will finally be realized. Meanwhile, Ryuka unveils her plan, explaining that her abilities allow her to enter a state of superconductivity, during which she will possess the gun and send a current through the circuit, thus unlocking the power of the gun. Before their endeavor, both Gaiman and Sarai pay respects to their late fathers, acknowledging the considerable achievements they once doubted. At the morgue, Detective Shun stares at his corpse, his gaze broken by the sudden arrival of Asuna and a fellow detective. He follows, observing keenly as they investigate the mysterious disappearance of Ririka's body. Rummaging through the deceased's belongings, Asuna locates a drawing depicting the events to come. Intrigued, the detective activates her ESP, taking her to the moment that Ririka created these drawings. Unfortunately, before the film can play out, Asuna feels a wave of pain engulf her body, forcing her to stop the encounter. Before she leaves, she takes Ririka's drawings with her and offers a respectful bow before Detective Shun's corpse as she departs. At the Air Force Base, Ryuka feigns concern, meeting with Takasu to check on the well-being of her grandfather. Elsewhere, Sazai discusses his theory of flexible time perception. His hypothesis suggests that wavelengths are truly elastic, enabling them to bend easily and return to a time perceived by their spirit body. Expanding on this idea, he proposes using the time of their death as a marker for rewinding everything, thereby facilitating a return to life. However, the only obstacle is his uncertainty regarding how time is perceived in the spirit world. Luckily, thanks to his dalliance with Arya and Kiryu, Detective Shun knows that one day in the spirit realm equates to 1 minute in the real world, meaning that they have technically been dead for only about 8 minutes. This gives just enough time to return to their bodies and rejoin the world of the living. All they need to resurrect is a massive electrical shock, as mutual recognition would electrify their bodies in the living realm. However, to generate such power, they have to utilize the technology located with the Arai facility, a dauntless task not for the faint of heart. Meanwhile, Asuna collapses as she makes her way to the meeting point. Thankfully, Ryuka catches wind of her situation and calls others to assist the troubled detective. Despite their help, the detective passes out from exhaustion, her body unable to withstand the strain of relentless pursuit and sleepless nights. As she rests, Detective Shun vows to complete their mission in her stead, thanking his dear friend for everything she had done for them. Upon her investigation, Ryuka discovered that the prime time to strike would be at 1 p.m. tomorrow, as Arai would be at maximum output at that point. Unfortunately, the said time is 13 hours past their limit, meaning that stopping the corporation would make it impossible for them to come back to life. As the group ponders their next move, Gammon notices Detective Shun staring intently at the drawing of Ririka. They realize that one of the images depicts a man being shot by a gun that bears similar features to the weapon Ryuka had frequently used to shock her boss. Knowing that sacrificing herself would be the only way to revive her friends, Overleen accepts her fate, ready to give her life to make amends for the suffering she had caused them. Her willingness to die causes Gammon to lash out in frustration, begging the high heavens for they that had caused him so much pain and anguish. Suddenly, a golden light fills his hand, momentarily manifesting in the key he so desperately longed for. At that moment, Ryuka realizes that the lad's abilities might allow him to summon the key through mutual recognition. Focusing all of his willpower onto the key, Gammon channels his emotions into a concentrated effort, ultimately willing the key into existence with every fiber of his being. Ryuka immediately takes the trinket and inserts it into the gun, unlocking its limiter and unveiling its true form. As word of his power reaches Takasu, the group celebrate their victory, for they now possess the means to defeat Arai. Unfortunately, undertaking the mission would leave Gammon stranded in the spirit realm as his friends return to the world of the living. Despite their desperate pleas and heartfelt messages, Gammon chooses to stay behind and complete the mission with his own two hands. As the tears flow like an endless waterfall, he begs them for one last chance to be the hero, ordering Ryuka to revive his friends. Moments later, they emerge from their watery graves, their once still hearts now beating with the vibrant rhythm of their newfound life. As they clamber upon the bridge, they find Ririka waiting for them, her hands once again busy with another drawing. Detective Shun wastes no time immediately questioning if she is capable of inducing out-of-body experiences, which he believes to be the reason for her prophetic art. Unfortunately, before he can further question her on the matter, she vanishes into thin air, leaving them in stunned disbelief. Meanwhile, Gammon and Ryuka spend their final moments together, the young lad expressing his desire to reunite with his dad upon completion of their mission. The pair reminisce about how proud they are of their father's achievements that the MMG threatens to shatter with their sinister plot. Suddenly, their heartfelt moment is interrupted by the arrival of Takasu, who immediately notices the gun in its maximum output mode. Her orders to return to Arai, claiming that the Emperor's scandium injections had been sped up due to Gammon's orphan receptor. As Takasu slowly approaches Ryuka, Gammon senses something amiss, soon spotting the anti-spirit artifact the man had concealed. Unfortunately, before Gammon can react, Takasu strikes him with the staff, sending streaks of brilliant energy cascading through the park. Ryuka immediately drops the gun and rushes to her downed friend, gently clasping his hand as he reels from the blow. With his force slowly fading, Ryuka reaffirms her vow to forever remain by his side, sealing it with one last kiss before he vanishes into the night. Upon his disappearance, Ryuka collapses onto the floor as the gun reverts to its original form. Suddenly, Gammon materializes behind Takasu, revealing that he had taken the key through mutual recognition, thus disabling the weapon. Fully charged and fueled by revenge, Gammon delivers an earth-shattering punch to Takasu's face, sending the corporate scum flying across the park. With time running out, Ryuka begs Gammon to complete the mission, as the hurried operation of the Emperor might leave him enough time to return to the world of the living. Unfortunately, with the station being miles away, the lad knows that it would be nearly impossible to get there without some form of divine intervention. However, instead of an angel, Gammon is greeted by a devil, as Kiryu and Arya hover above him like bats in the night sky. They encourage him to unleash his imagination and utilize the true capabilities of their spiritual form. Thanks to their guidance and his indomitable will, Gammon manages to manifest a pair of divine wings that allow him to defy the rules of gravity. Moments later, he spots the station, descending upon the base like an angel of death, forcing the scientists to rush the Emperor's rebirth. Unfortunately, before he can activate his abilities, the world suddenly goes bleak, leading Gammon to believe that he has come just short of the finish line. As he wallows in defeat, the young lad suddenly finds himself before his dear dad, who urges him to use the sky sensor to tune into the right frequency. Together, they turn the dial, eventually locating the frequency needed for Gammon to return. With a renewed vigor, Gammon activates both the gun and his sky sensor simultaneously, unleashing a booming burst of energy that pierces through the station, sending it bursting into flames. Days later, the group reunite at the cafe, together celebrating their victory while yearning for the presence of their dear Gammon. Despite his loss, they find solace in the fact that the young blogger has continued to pursue his dreams within the spirit realm, constantly updating Kiri Kiri Basara, resulting in a massive surge in the website's popularity. His determination sends an overjoyed Ryuka jumping off her seat as she remembers their promise to one day enjoy a bowl of frozen yogurt together. Meanwhile, back at the radio station, an odd static interference emerges from within Gammon's sky sensor. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.